The wind keeps pressing forward, and I watch the endless steppe ripple beneath its force. Thick clouds race across the sky while the short grass bows with every gust. In this vast rolling landscape, only two landmarks refuse to move: a snow-covered mountain rising on the horizon and the distant outline of Marennes Cathedral. After I spend what feels like a lonely hour walking from the nearest village, the wind kicks dust into the air and sends it swirling through the whispering grass around me. Little by little, the cathedral starts revealing itself. I can finally make out its tall conical tower, the roof covered in patches of lichen, and the empty window openings staring back at me. Eventually, I climb over the scattered ruins surrounding the old church and step inside. Sunlight pours through a collapsed section of the wall, shining across a floor that has been ripped apart by treasure hunters searching for valuables long ago. Above me, faded images of Christ and the prophets still look down over the bare apse even after all these centuries. Over one of the side entrances, I notice a carved stone panel. Time and weather have worn away much of its detail, but I can still clearly see two figures standing on either side of a crucifix. It may be hard for me to recognise its meaning today, but 14 centuries ago, when this church was newly built, almost everyone would have understood exactly what it represented. The carving almost certainly marks March 21st, 630, the day when the Roman Emperor Heraclius officially returned the true cross, the holiest relic in all of Christianity, to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. The recovery of the true cross symbolised the end of a devastating war that had lasted for an entire generation and had come dangerously close to wiping out the Roman Empire itself. Heraclius secured that victory through a series of bold military campaigns launched from the high steppes of Armenia. Not far from where those campaigns began, and shortly after the war finally ended, an Armenian prince built Marennes Cathedral to honour both the victory and the role he had played in achieving it. Marennes Cathedral stands close to what was once the most fiercely disputed border in the ancient world, the dividing line between the Roman and Persian empires. For nearly 700 years, starting with the great campaigns of Pompey, the eastern frontier of the Roman Empire stretched from the Armenian highlands all the way down to the Arabian desert. The section that saw the most constant fighting was the middle of that frontier, where it cut across the rich and fertile plains of northern Mesopotamia. Still, whenever war broke out, almost any stretch of that 1,000-mile border could suddenly become the stage for a major military campaign. Many of the wars between Rome and Persia eventually centred on long sieges of the heavily fortified cities that protected the Mesopotamian frontier. Outside of those major sieges, the fighting usually took the form of raids followed by counterattacks. Back and forth it went, century after century, with neither side making lasting gains or seriously expecting to change the balance of power. That uneasy balance seemed so permanent that most people probably believed it was simply the natural order of the world. Then, as the 6th century drew to a close, everything changed. The long-standing balance that had defined the region for generations was broken forever. But before I dive into the story of the devastating final war between the Roman and Persian empires, there's one important thing I should explain first. Before I get back to the story, I want to take a quick moment to thank the sponsor of this video. Babbel is a language learning app that helps people build real-world speaking skills through short interactive lessons based on everyday conversations. I've spent a good amount of time travelling in Turkey over the years, and I used to speak Turkish well enough to hold a conversation. But after being away for so long, I realised I'd become pretty rusty, so I decided to use Babbel to sharpen my skills again. Babbel includes several Turkish courses designed for different goals and interests. I chose the Turkish for Your Vacation course because it focused on practical phrases I could actually use while travelling. As I worked through the lessons, I practiced helpful expressions like Muza Açık, which means "is the museum open?" and Otobüs dolu, meaning "the bus is full." If you've been thinking about learning a new language, Babbel says you can start speaking in as little as 3 weeks. You can sign up today by using the link in the video description to receive 65% off your subscription. And if it turns out it isn't the right fit for you, Babbel also offers a 20-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it with confidence. Now, with that out of the way, let's get back to the Roman frontier. One September morning in the year 590, the Roman guards stationed at Ctesium, a frontier fortress in northern Mesopotamia, were caught off guard when they spotted a group of Persian horsemen racing toward them from the east. What made the sight even more unusual was that the riders were dressed in the formal clothing of the Persian royal court. The group came to a stop beneath the fortress gates, and their leader, a young man who looked to be around 20 years old, called up in respectable Greek, asking if he could speak with the commanding officer. Once the gates were opened, the young noble revealed his identity. He introduced himself as Khosrow, the newly crowned king of Persia, and explained that he had been forced to flee after a palace coup threatened his life. The commander at Ctesium wasted no time. He arranged for Khosrow and the loyal men travelling with him to be escorted to the Roman headquarters in the nearby city of Hierapolis. From there, Khosrow sent envoys to Emperor Maurice with a remarkable proposal. If the Romans would help him reclaim his throne, he promised to reward them with generous territorial concessions. Maurice accepted the offer, and when spring arrived, Roman armies poured into Persia. They captured the capital, crushed the rebel forces in a decisive campaign, and restored Khosrow to the Persian throne. Everything changed in 602 when Maurice himself was overthrown during a military mutiny. The man who seized power, Phocas, ordered the execution of the emperor along with all 6 of his sons. Their severed heads were then displayed in Constantinople's main forum as a brutal warning to anyone who might oppose the new ruler. Even so, rumours quickly began to spread that Maurice's oldest son and rightful heir, Theodosius, had escaped by bribing the executioner before the sentence could be carried out. Just a few weeks later, a man claiming to be Theodosius arrived at the Persian court. Even though Khosrow almost certainly knew that the real Theodosius had already been killed, he used the man's supposed survival as a reason to launch a full-scale invasion of the Roman Empire. Publicly, he claimed he was fighting to restore the rightful emperor to the throne. The Persian armies advanced through the frontier in a relentless series of hard-fought sieges. One by one, they captured the heavily fortified cities of Mesopotamia, eventually smashing through Rome's strongest defensive line just as the empire itself was falling into civil war. At the same time, the Roman governor of Africa openly rebelled against Emperor Phocas. He sent his son Heraclius across the Mediterranean with a fleet bound for Constantinople to overthrow the usurper. After securing the loyalty of Egypt, Heraclius continued his march toward the imperial capital. Once he arrived, he personally executed Phocas by beheading him, and not long afterward he was crowned the new Roman emperor. With Constantinople consumed by political turmoil, Khosrow seized the opportunity to push much deeper into Roman territory than ever before. The Persians captured Antioch, and before long Damascus fell as well. Heraclius had been struggling to reinforce the crumbling Roman defences along the Danube frontier, but the worsening crisis forced him to move south into Syria. Gathering the largest army he could possibly assemble, he marched out to confront the Persians. Unfortunately for him, most of his soldiers lacked proper training and experience. They were defeated in battle, leaving Heraclius with no choice but to pull his army back in retreat. In 614, the Persians laid siege to Jerusalem, and after only a short time, the city fell into their hands. Most of its churches were burned, and they carried away the True Cross as one of their greatest prizes. Losing the True Cross was a devastating blow to the Romans. Throughout the empire, it was honoured as the very instrument of Christ's crucifixion, and its capture deeply shook the people's confidence and spirit. The loss felt even greater when the relic was taken back to the Persian capital and placed inside the private chapel of Khosrow's Christian wife, Shirin. While one Persian army pushed south and conquered Egypt, another advanced west across Anatolia until it reached the Asian side of Constantinople, bringing the enemy right to the doorstep of the Roman capital. Running out of options, Heraclius tried to bring the war to an end through diplomacy. He offered Khosrow major territorial concessions, hoping the Persians would agree to withdraw their armies, but by then Khosrow had gained far too much to settle for the old balance of power. Persia officially annexed Syria, Palestine and Egypt, while a permanent Persian military camp was established directly across the Bosporus from Constantinople. At the same time, the empire faced another disaster. The Avars and Slavs surged across the Danube, overrunning most of the Balkans and Greece, while the Romans struggled to defend themselves on multiple fronts. By that point, very little of the Roman Empire was still under its own control, and its future looked incredibly bleak. Even so, Heraclius refused to surrender. No matter how hopeless the situation appeared, he kept fighting. To keep the war going, Heraclius made an extraordinary sacrifice. He ordered the gold and silver treasures from Constantinople's churches to be melted down so he could pay and supply his soldiers. With those resources, I see him rebuild what was left of Rome's army. Instead of relying mainly on the traditional heavy infantry, he reshaped his forces by adding units of skilled archers and fast-moving light cavalry that were better suited for quick strikes and hit-and-run fighting. Leading this newly organised army, Heraclius began launching attacks against Persian forces across Anatolia. Although the victories were modest at first, each success gave the Romans more confidence and slowly shifted the momentum in their favour. After successfully surviving a major Persian attempt to capture Constantinople, Heraclius made an even bolder move. Rather than staying close to the capital, he established his main base in and around Armenia, where he could interfere with Persian troop movements and send raiding forces deep into the enemy's territory. That gamble turned out to be one of the smartest decisions of the entire war. Operating from strong positions in Armenia and the Caucasus, Heraclius struck city after city across northern Mesopotamia. His constant raids forced the Persians to pull troops away from the lands they had conquered, leaving them no choice but to confront his army instead of continuing their expansion. After Heraclius dealt crushing defeats to Persia's two most capable generals, Khosrow decided it was time for one final overwhelming strike. He understood that if Constantinople fell, the Roman Empire would almost certainly fall with it. Heraclius succeeded in intercepting and destroying one of the Persian armies that was advancing toward the capital, but the second force slipped past him and managed to link up with an enormous coalition of Avars and Slavs, all preparing for a coordinated assault on Constantinople. The Roman navy played a critical role in the city's defence. It kept the Persian army trapped on the Asian side of the Bosporus by destroying the fleet of dugout canoes the Avars had assembled to ferry their allies across the strait. Meanwhile, on the European side of the city, nearly 80,000 attackers threw themselves again and again against Constantinople's massive defensive walls. Despite the relentless attacks, the city's towering triple walls refused to give way. Every assault was beaten back and the defenders held their ground. After 6 exhausting weeks, the Avars and Slavs finally broke off the siege and retreated in confusion while the Persian forces pulled back to their camp without achieving their objective. Furious over the failed operation, Khosrow ordered the execution of Shah Baraz, the Persian general who had been responsible for coordinating the siege, but Heraclius managed to intercept the message carrying that order. Instead of destroying it, he had the death warrant delivered directly to Shahbaraz along with his compliments and subtly suggested that the general might be better off changing sides. Shahbaraz took the hint. He abandoned Khosrow's cause, switched his allegiance and withdrew his entire army to Syria. After taking Khosrow's most capable general out of the fight, Heraclius pressed the advantage instead of slowing down. He formed an alliance with the nomadic Khazars and together they launched devastating raids deep into Persian territory. Then on a fog-covered morning in December of 627 near the ancient ruins of Nineveh, Heraclius came face to face with the largest Persian army still left in the field. The battle that followed was brutal and hard fought. According to tradition, Heraclius personally killed the Persian commander in single combat. Whether or not every detail is true, one thing is certain: the Romans emerged from the battle victorious. The very next day, Heraclius advanced toward the Persian capital, which was now left virtually defenceless. Khosrow still refused to accept peace, but he never got the chance to continue the war. His own nobles turned against him, removed him from power, and had him executed. They immediately opened negotiations with the Romans to bring the long conflict to an end. The peace agreement restored the frontier to its original position, ordered every Persian soldier to return home, and marked the end of one of the greatest wars between the two empires. With victory finally secured, Heraclius began his triumphant journey back to Constantinople. As he made his way home, Heraclius stopped in Armenia, where he spent several weeks accepting the loyalty and submission of the region's leading nobles. During that journey, he passed only a few miles from the freshly dug foundations of Merenn Cathedral, where one of Armenia's most powerful princes had only recently begun construction. The cathedral itself reflected influences from both Persian and Roman architecture, yet its magnificent dome was most likely inspired by the famous Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. It was inside this church in September 629 that Heraclius celebrated his victory over Persia. During the ceremony, the true cross hung above the high altar, suspended from magnificent gilded chains. The following year, while travelling through the territories that had been recovered from Persian control, Heraclius returned the sacred relic to its rightful place in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Back in Armenia, the return of the true cross became the inspiration for the carved relief above the north entrance of Merenn Cathedral. In that sculpture, the emperor is shown without a crown or a sceptre, symbolising his humility before God, yet the warhorse standing nearby quietly reminds everyone of the extraordinary military campaign that had saved the Roman Empire only a few years earlier. As Merenn Cathedral slowly rose from the ground, the Roman Empire finally found itself at peace after generations of war. But that peace would not last long. Before the cathedral was finished, and before either Rome or Persia had the opportunity to rebuild their armies, a completely new danger appeared on the horizon. From the deserts came fast-moving armies of Arab horsemen, united by the new faith of Islam and driven by a powerful sense of purpose. They swept across the eastern frontier with incredible speed, conquering Syria, Palestine and Egypt, one after another. By the time Merenn Cathedral was finally completed around the year 640, the world that Heraclius had fought so desperately to save was already beginning to disappear. The Persian Empire, once one of the greatest powers on earth, would collapse completely within the next decade. The Roman Empire, meanwhile, would survive, but it would come out of this crisis transformed. Its territory would be much smaller, and the empire itself would become something very different from what it had been for centuries. In that way, the years when Merenn Cathedral was being built represent a turning point in history, the final chapter of the ancient world and the beginning of an entirely new age. Returning now to Merenn Cathedral, the story of the church did not end with its completion. For centuries afterward, Arab and Byzantine raiding forces continued to move back and forth across the region south of the cathedral. A small town eventually grew around Merenn, supported by the activity and importance of the church, but over time, borders changed, trade routes shifted, and the settlement slowly faded away. The once important town disappeared back into the endless Armenian steppe. After 6 centuries of abandonment, Merenn Cathedral has been slowly reclaimed by time. Stone by stone, it has fallen back into the surrounding landscape and the endless fields of whispering grass. Today, birds echo beneath its ancient dome, sunlight pours through the broken walls, and the wind continues to sweep across the empty steppe, pushing the grass as the landscape moves around this forgotten monument. If you enjoyed this video, consider supporting Told in Stone on Patreon. You might also be interested in my book Naked Statues, Fat Gladiators and War Elephants. Thanks for watching.